If you've ever wondered to yourself why states export arms, you've come to the right place. This video will highlight the six primary political military benefits and four economic benefits of exporting arms. The first benefit of exporting arms is probably the most obvious: to support allies. Arms transfers are intended to enhance the military capability and capacity of friendly states. This enhanced capability and capacity is often used to pursue shared objectives with the supplier state. A great example would be U.S. arms exports to the United Kingdom. Not only does it bolster our ally, but it also assists the shared objective of Western international hegemony. More recently, in the case of the Ukrainian conflict, we can see that utilizing arms to support an ally is much less costly than direct military involvement. Arms exports from NATO countries to the Ukrainian military serve to not only support the Ukrainian government's efforts to stand up to the Russian military force within the country, it also allows NATO countries to not be directly involved in a conflict with Russia, which may result in a nuclear conflict. Arms exports can also hold a symbolic role. Arms exports to a state can symbolize political commitment to the importing state and emphasize friendly relations. Cold War exports by the Soviet Union to Cuba, Syria, Iran, as well as U.S. exports to Israel, Vietnam, and Korea symbolized political commitments of both governments. Arms exports can also be used as a tool of influence for the exporting state. Arms transfers can provide the supplier state with influence over the importing state and enhance cooperation between both states. Policymakers during the Cold War used arms transfers as a tool primarily of foreign policy and influence. U.S. arms transfers to Egypt and Israel after the peace treaty signed in 1979 that continue to this day are seen as a tool of influence to keep both parties at peace. If arms transfers can be used as a tool for influence, they can be used as a tool for leverage. Arms transfers can provide the supplier state with leverage over the importing state by manipulating the supply of arms to the importing nation. Although arms as a tool of leverage is decreasing in efficacy due to the number and diversity of suppliers on the world market, many policymakers continue to utilize arms transfers as a tool of leverage. U.S. arms export restrictions to KSA after the death of Jamal Khashoggi were meant to strong arm KSA to respect human rights. Similarly, after the Egyptian coup of President Mohamed Morsi, U.S. arms export restrictions were meant to bring Egypt back on the path of democratization and respecting human rights issues. Unfortunately, in both examples, the use of arms as leverage seems to have had little effect. A lesser known benefit that arms transfers play for the supplier state is the ability to use arms transfers as a strategy for non-proliferation of nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction. Arms transfers may in some circumstances alleviate perceptions of insecurity by recipient governments that constitute the main motive for seriously considering the nuclear option. Massive arms transfers to countries like Japan and South Korea have had the dual effect of providing security in the face of regional threats, but also to keep both countries, who likely possess the ability to produce nuclear weapons, from pursuing nuclear weapons development. Another benefit of exporting your arms is the fact that you can export and test the arms in combat. Arms transfers to recipients in conflict can assist the supplier state in developing and marketing weapons, assuming that they're used in combat operations successfully. This is an often not talked about benefit of exporting arms, especially to states in conflict. Recently, Russia was able to test its newly developed weapons such as the Su-34 in combat over Syria, although Su-34 losses in the current Ukrainian conflict would suggest that their testing didn't go far enough. The United States has also utilized exports to test combat equipment, as it has been able to see the effectiveness of U.S.-made anti-tank weapons against the newest Russian-produced armor in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. From a business perspective, the testing of equipment can prove to be a boon to export sales and revenue if the equipment does well. For example, the relative success of the Turkish made TB2 Bakhtiar UAV in the Ukrainian conflict has resulted in massive sales abroad and brought much needed money into the fledgling Turkish defense industry. When most of us read about a country exporting weapons, we tend to think of the political and military benefits of the transfers first. However, increasingly, arms transfers are motivated by economic benefits. Countries such as the US require an export market for its weapons in order to keep domestic military industry profitable and productive. Let's go ahead and explore some of the main economic benefits of exporting arms. One economic benefit of exporting arms is that the export of arms often contributes to the balance of payments between the exporting state and the recipient state. In international economics, the balance of payments of a country is the difference between all money flowing into the country in a particular period of time, i.e., a quarter or a year, and the outflow of money to the rest of the world. These financial transactions are made by individuals, firms, and government bodies to compare receipts and payments arising out of the trades of goods and services. In this regard, arms are no different than any other kind of export. The more arms a country exports, the more foreign revenue flows back into the exporting state. For nations that produce the most sought-after high-tech military arms, exporting arms contributes a great amount to its balance of payments each year. Another important economic benefit comes in the form of employment. Arms exports allow the exporting state and its domestic businesses to retain and even expand employment. And states tend to care very much about employment levels. For instance, in 2017, United States President Donald Trump claimed that record arms sales to Saudi Arabia would create, quote unquote, over 1 million jobs. Whereas a White House statement given that same year estimated that the $8 billion arms deal would potentially support a little bit less, about tens of thousands of new jobs. And lastly, a report from the Center of International Policy estimated that that same deal would create a number of jobs in the realm of 20 to 40,000, given that the U.S. defense sector already supports around 370,000 direct jobs. Either way, arms sales allow domestic defense firms to expand their businesses and hire more people to support current and future sales. Another economic benefit is that the money from any export feeds the domestic defense production base in the exporting country. Arms exports help to smooth production rates, keep production lines open, and keep companies afloat during times of limited domestic demand and procurement. Decreased domestic demand in the U.S. after the fall of the Soviet Union forced a major contraction in the domestic defense market. Companies that relied on U.S. domestic procurement tended to go out of business or merged with larger defense companies. The contraction got so bad that then President Bill Clinton met with the leading defense companies to implore them to seek export markets in order to survive. Today, U.S. domestic defense companies actively engage the international market as a strategy to insulate themselves from decreased domestic demand. Increasing foreign sales and exports also helps the exporting country with domestic procurement costs. Extending production runs of a product due to export demand can also reduce the unit costs of products due to economies of scale. This is especially important for high-tech, high-cost capital defense goods like the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. To offset the cost of such an expensive weapon, the United States and its domestic manufacturers developed the F-35 with the export market in mind. The more F-35 aircraft that are sold, the less the United States military would have to pay to equip its own military, thereby expanding military capability, most importantly, at a discount. Although limited in use, arms exports can be used to secure resources needed for domestic defense industry and the economy in general of a supplying state. The Russian Federation actively used and continues to use arms exports as bartering chips for natural resource access. Past arms exports to Libya and Algeria facilitated oil exploration access to Russian petroleum companies, access that they continue to exploit today.